Hello and welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, Is a Family Office Right for You? Before we begin, I'd like to run through a couple of administrative points. This is a 60-minute program. As Dagmar said, you'll be able to ask questions during and after the presentation. Just follow the prompts to enter your questions from your computer whenever they occur to you. And the presentation and supporting material will be emailed to all participants after the webinar so you can follow up. In today's program, we'll present the nuts and bolts of a family office and provide some points to help you assess whether a family office is a good option for you. It's my pleasure now to introduce our speakers. Charlie Carr is a U.S. Family Enterprise Leader at PwC. Belinda Snedden is Managing Director, U.S. Family Enterprise Advisory Services at PwC. And they're joined by Allison Norris, Family Office Director at the Biltmore Company. And with that, I'll turn the floor over to Charlie to get us started. Charlie?
Hi. Well, thank you, and good afternoon. Thank you. We've got a great crowd here. We're excited to talk through this topic that seems to be generating a lot of interest. What we want to do is just start right away with one of the poll questions. We're going to jump right in with that. Which statement best applies to you? We don't have a family office and don't think we need one. We don't have a family office but are interested in setting one up. We have a family office but are considering a different setup. We have a family office and are currently satisfied with the setup. Or I'm an advisor to other family offices and it doesn't apply. So while you go through that, I'm really excited to welcome Belinda Snedden and Allison Norris to this panel. We've got a great group here with a lot of experience around family offices and talking about what family offices are and what you ought to be thinking about if you're thinking about starting one. What would either prod you to do so or maybe prod you not to do so as we go through this process. So, David, do we have results yet?
Excuse me, the results are just coming in right now. If everyone could answer the question and press the submit button, I will pull these up. Hang on one second. And here's what we have so far, and I will show you the results in a moment. But we don't have a family office and I don't think we need one, 20%. We don't have a family office but interested in setting up one is 39%. We have a family office, but considering a different setup, 24%. And we have a family office and are currently satisfied, 16%. I'm going to show the results to everyone. I thank you very much for answering that question.
Great. Thanks, David. So with that, let's get into what is a family office, because it's interesting when somebody talks about setting up a family office either within their family business or perhaps they've sold the business or whatever. One of the big fears they have is they know somebody who has an office that has 20, 30, 40 employees, and they're thinking that's not what we need. You know, they're thinking about one of the big, huge offices that are out there, been around forever, maybe the Rockefellers or something like that, and that scares them out of this. But a family office is an organization created to oversee and manage the financial needs of a family, including transferring the wealth across generations, but they operate like a company. They can range from a two-person office to those with 20 or more employees. In fact, Belinda and I are working with one right now that says that they have one person in their office. Now, they have a network of advisors around them that are supporting them, that essentially outsourced advisors, and we might count a few of the other business employees as part of the office, but that's nitpicking. But it does not have to be a large organization. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. They can be organized as a separate entity. They can be an LLC or a trust or a corporation, or they might be embedded in the family business. And we have quite a few that the family office is a division of the CFO's office and reports up into them. So a lot of different options there. As we get going here, Allison, would you tell us a little bit about the Biltmore Company's family office and maybe how it came to be and what it looks like?
Yes, I'd be happy to. Thank you for having me on the call today. Wanted to share with you a little history about how our family office came to be. About the family business, it is currently led by Generation 4. Generation 5 is also working in the business. When Generation 4 approached Generation 3 about beginning a family office, Generation 3 didn't see the need and was actually opposed to the idea. So the first obstacle for Generation 4 was to respectfully disagree and continue onward. Generation 3 was comprised of two brothers that had to divide the company because they didn't share the same vision. So they divided the company in half. And that has been the current Generation 4's driving force to ensure that their family works together to preserve Biltmore Estate. And actually, Biltmore Estate's mission statement is the family's main filter for their decision-making, and that is the preservation of Biltmore Estate as a privately owned, profitable working estate. And then just a little bit about how our family office is set up. We still have our assets, so we have not sold our operating business. We are not a public company either, and we don't receive any public funding. So we are a single-family office that is geared to assist the family members working within the company, and actually to family members not working within the company as well. And we are able to hold down our costs by offering services to the family from within the company. So that is how our single-family office is structured. Charlie?
Yeah, great. Thank you. So, Belinda, why don't you talk to us about why somebody would create a family office?
Sure. Well, I think we know that the motivations for each family are very specific to their circumstances. So there's lots of different reasons why families move to take the step to create a family office. But we do find that there's often alignment to some central themes around why they would do that. We've listed in the presentation a number of reasons why families would work or look to create a family office, but I generally think about it as the 4 C's for simplicity, and those are continuity, control, confidentiality, and cost. And so when you think through all of the reasons we've listed why a family may have an interest in doing this, from a confidentiality standpoint, it can relate to the family's privacy, it can relate to the level of information that they want to share with third parties and other advisors. From a continuity standpoint, we think of continuity across generations, across entities and structural ownerships. From a control standpoint, obviously the ability to control the family's holdings, to control the investment strategies, and control the strategic direction for the family. And from a cost perspective as well, the ability to really be able to deliver services on behalf of the family with great value. So, at this point, I think we'd like to get a sense from the audience around motivations for thinking about a family office. So we're going to go back to a polling question and would ask you to respond to the primary driver of your interest in the family office, whether it be protecting family privacy, control over family holdings, simplified administration, ensuring continuity across generations, managing the family wealth, pooling the family resources, or addressing broader family needs.
Okay, I have posed the question, and we'll just wait a minute here to see. Posing it right now. And there it is. If everyone could answer with their most their largest reason, their primary driving interest.
And I think for advisors on the phone, we would ask to think about it in the context of the primary drivers of interest for the families that you work with. Okay,
I'm just going to let people do a little bit more posing, where I see results are continuing to pour in. And if you'll hang 1 second with me, I will just go ahead and preview those results right now, and then I will send them out to everybody. So protect family privacy, 3%. Control family holdings, 9%. Simplify the administrative burden, 18%. ensure continuity across generations, 21%, manage family wealth, 34%, and both pool family resources and address family needs came in at 8%. And I am sending those results now for everyone to see. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, David.
This is Barbara. Could I just jump in with a question? How long does it take to set up a family office?
Oh, that's a great question. Not one with an easy answer, because a lot of the situations I've seen, I mean, theoretically, you can go set up an entity and have a person hired to lead something in a month. But realistically, what we encourage them to do is to start with the business plan, and so that process is going to take you a couple of months. Hiring people always seems to take longer than you think in finding the right staff. Now, many times when they first start a family office, they already know who's going to lead it. It's the CFO of the business. It's something like that. So they're jumping right in with a person already in mind, and that can speed things up a little bit. But generally, I'd say you're talking 6 to 9 months, really, to get one started. I don't know, Allison or Belinda, if either one of you have other thoughts on that question.
This is Allison. So I will say that the first year that the family was considering what would a family office look like, how would it be developed, the first year was all education and research, getting themselves up to speed on what could a family office be like for them. So I do know that much. That was before I got here, but after interviewing the family, I know the first year was educational.
And I think to Charlie's point, depending on the orientation of the family going into starting up the family office, whether or not there's a known entity or person who's going to be running that family office, it can change the time frame. But I would also say that for family offices that are established without sort of that planning process at the beginning, what we often find is there's a longer period of iteration or evolution until the office sort of lands at its final structure. So it might get up and running fairly quickly, but then it could also take 18 to 24 months for it to evolve into a more final form, because they're sort of building and running at the same time.
Yeah.
And we're always assessing. This is Allison again. We're always assessing what services does the family need. We take a look at that constantly. So we started small, and we have grown now through the years.
Great. So let's talk about the complexity of family offices, because there's a range, and I don't know if it's as linear as what we've tended to show here, but on the least complex side, on the left-hand side here, we've got outsourcing this to a multifamily office that you're using a third party, so the complexity of the family is reduced because you're just outsourcing this to third party. Now, the multifamily office can be a large institution, one of the big banks, or it can be a smaller. A lot of times they tend to be focused more on the investment side. They're trying to get your investment assets, but it could be a smaller registered investment advisor, RIA, that's also handling some of maybe paying bills and doing some other family office services. But that's on the least complex side. As you start moving over, quite often when we see somebody starting a family office, it starts within their family business, what we call embedded. It's one or two or three people inside the CFO's office usually who are handling distributions. They start, maybe they're managing the insurance for family members, or they're doing technology support in there, or other services they start providing for family members within the family business, and it tends to grow over time. Underneath that, you see this virtual family office, and I was actually having a conversation with some of the Family Business Magazine people, I think, or somebody here in the last few weeks about virtual family offices and what we see. And the thing is that that's a term that's been thrown around at least a decade now. I don't know that I see what somebody might purely call a VFO that operates that way. What we typically see are family offices, whether they're embedded or outsourced, or they're accounting, or in these next groups, family offices that have minimized their internal staff. They take what they're really good at, and they've outsourced the other functions. Maybe they're outsourcing tax compliance, or maybe they're outsourcing estate planning, or in many cases bill pay, or concierge-type services, or things like that. They've taken and said, this is the staff we have. We want to keep it small, so we're going to outsource the functions that we aren't best at, or that we can do And, IT support's another great one. Taking care of all the technology at the family member's house is quite often outsourced. So that's really what I would call more of a virtual family office. It's some of these other family offices. Maybe you only have 1, 2, 3, 4 staff, and you've outsourced the other functions to advisors that you trust. The accounting and investment single-family offices, I think this is what we mostly hear about and run across. I don't know, you can ever categorize things, but if you did, I think this would be the highest volume of family offices out there. And then the difference is who's heading it up. So the accounting family offices, it's often headed up by you hired somebody from your accounting firm, or you hired the CFO of the family business to run this, and there's more of a focus on producing financial reports, managing the cost, it's more on the accounting side, or doing tax compliance, things like that. The investment family office, it's headed up often by an investment family. One of the families we're working with right now is wanting somebody that will analyze opportunities, venture capital deals, and things like that for the family members. So that would be more of an investment-focused family office. That it's more looking at the investment side. And then when you get to the most complex, often families have gone out and formed a private trust company. Now this is where you've got a lot of generations. You've got a whole lot of trust. The trust company serves as the trustee of those trusts, so you don't have the succession issues you would otherwise. You're maintaining a board. There's a lot of complexity. You have to have written policies and procedures. It gets a lot more complex. And the investment complex, very similar. You've got shared investment holdings. You're probably doing partnership accounting and fund accounting to manage among all the different family trusts and entities. But it's more that investment piece. And in that case, they haven't formed a PTC. Allison, can you share with us a little bit about the benefits of a family office?
Certainly. The family controls how the services are delivered. That's a great benefit. So we are able to communicate with the family members to find out what their needs are, and then be able to offer those exclusive services to our family members. Another benefit is that the family office is the primary resource for your family's needs. So we provide exclusive services. We provide education and career development, wealth management, estate and tax planning. And like I said earlier, these services for our family office are available to all family members, whether they are working in the business or not. And then, too, like Charlie was saying a little while ago, we do coordinate with several professional advisors. So while I may be the main contact for the family members, I certainly don't have all the questions or all the answers or all the expertise. So I go and I know where to find the answers and communicate with our advisors. And then, too, because our family office exists within our operating companies, we are able to draw on the services provided by those internal operating units, which is very beneficial for the family as far as technology, insurance, and other services go.
Great. So, Belinda, we'll give you the negative side of this. Tell us what are the drawbacks. Why would somebody not want this?
Oh yes, lucky me. So there can be some drawbacks, but what I would say is that for each one of these drawbacks, there are lots of great strategies and processes that families and family offices can use to really manage them and to help mitigate them. I think in general, what we hear particularly from families who are thinking about doing it or thinking about the pros and cons of doing it, the primary drawbacks that often get vocalized are, concerns around different family members not having autonomy or independence. So they give that up in order to work collectively, particularly around investments. Certainly with good governance and appropriate investment policy statements and agreement at the strategic level around an investment direction, a lot of this can be mitigated, and we also will oftentimes see families where it's a combination of, some money being managed on a pooled basis and other money being managed individually and kept separate on behalf of the family members. We also know that structuring and operating a family office can be a complicated, time-consuming, and expensive process. It requires the same level of diligence and discipline as an operating company would to be managed effectively and efficiently and with the right policies and controls in place. But again, for many families, it's often a combination of thinking through what's really important for them to do and control internally within the family office, and then potentially looking to outsource what might be some of the more expensive services to a provider or an advisor that they trust. So these drawbacks in and of themselves are not necessarily reasons not to have a family office. They may be something that you want to think about from the standpoint of structure and design to create some mitigation around them. One of the biggest challenges that we see with offices over time is scope creep, and this is very common. The expectations of family members for either increased returns or additional services rendered by the family office grows over time. So it's it's a very clear best practice to have a defined communication method around understanding exactly what the office is going to do for the family members and being able to measure that and report on that on an ongoing basis. And then finally, as the family grows, there's more likelihood for differences and imbalances in the wealth between family members and different branches of the family. And so scope may change not only in services, but in just the nature of the family and their particular circumstances. I think most important to remember, and Allison made this comment a little earlier, these are not static organizations or entities, and it's a great way to mitigate this potential drawback is to just on an ongoing basis continue to think about and evaluate the services that the office provides to the family and the changing characteristics and dynamics of the family as well.
This is Allison.
I'm sorry, Allison, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I was just going to speak a little bit to the scope creep, and one way we stay ahead of that is through education and communication. Our family council meets twice a year, so that's a wonderful opportunity to get together and share information about family office services, for example, bring in guest speakers. Then we also, in addition to those two family council meetings, we produce 2 family newsletters that include articles about the family and what's going on within the business. And then in between those, we still reach out to the next generation members with quarterly quick updates of financial news or other current information they need to know, in addition to one-on-one conversations with family members. So all of these ways we are keeping in touch with them to keep them informed of these are the services we offer and to find out their needs too. So that has really helped in that area for us.
Allison, that leads me perfectly to the question that I was going to ask.
Okay.
I've run across a couple of families who are interested in a family office, and not for the wealth management aspect, but for family education and development of their next generation, as well as some concierge services. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to ask the group how prevalent that is, because I think a lot of people, when they think about family offices, they're thinking about wealth management primarily.
Well, I'll start. Well, okay. For Biltmore, when this family office began, it was for the purpose of the family and not the family business, how to keep the family informed about the business, but they wanted a clear delineation between the operations of the family and the operations of the business. So that's when we started small by offering concierge services, some risk protection, and then we grew from there. So that's exactly, to your point, how this family office began.
We see a lot of family offices. I'm not sure if they're evenly split, but I'd say it's probably not too far between family offices that were formed, and their focus is all about the investments. They're looking for the next deal. They're looking to manage the investments. They're not doing, in fact, concierge sometimes is a dirty word. I think it's been misspelled because I think a lot of families think it's actually a four-letter word. But their focus is purely on the investment side. And then we see a lot of families, and I think it's about evenly split. We see a lot of families whose focus really is the burdens of the wealth, the administration, paying bills. It's to simplify the life of those family members. That's the purpose of it. So I do think that there's a lot of them in that space. It's interesting, and I can't say this again definitively, but when I talk to people in Europe and overseas, I tend to get a lot more focus on those who are more investment. A lot of times, in fact, many of the family offices that I talk to overseas have a tendency to feel more like what I would consider to be a hedge fund for that family than they are a family office, because it's purely about the investment side. I think in the United States, there's tend to be a little more balance on that topic. So when you're forming a family office, let's talk about 7 things that you should consider, because when we get the question, I think a lot of families are looking for a formula. A plus B equals C, and so if you have these 3 characteristics, these 3 traits, then you should do it. And I hate to tell you this, but it's far more qualitative than that. It's not clear-cut. There's an evaluation exercise that you'll have to go through. We can help you through that exercise, but it's an exercise you'd have to go through to decide whether a family office really is the right answer. And even within that, which type of family office? Is it a very small, or is it larger, or what it really is? So let's talk about the 7 key traits or characteristics we think that you should consider. And the first of those is the wealth complexity. One of the families that last year we helped set up a family office, the patriarch made the comment that the purpose of this family office was to, quote, remove the burden of wealth from the talent so that they could focus on the business. To his mind, the talent was the next generation working in the business. So he wanted to remove the burden of their wealth from the talent so they could focus their time and attention on the business. Thinking about just the complexity, as the wealth has gone up, and in this family's case, they have been receiving cash and money. They've been out doing investments. They have real estate. They have other things, plus the various trusts that they own, and the way the administration of that. He didn't want them having to worry about that. He wanted them to focus on continuing to grow and build the business. But still, the complexity of the worth and of the wealth, and in many cases, you'll see families, they have no idea what they're worth. They don't have any reporting, anything like that, and that's part of what's driving this. The next one I'll say is multiple generations. There are definitely families that have a single generation. In fact, there's a couple of them that are in the wealthiest families in the United States that are a single generation, no heirs, and probably beyond having kids at this point, who have a family office that makes a lot of sense. However, for the vast majority of families, it's having 2, 3, 4 generations is where this starts making sense, is as you're looking across the generations of preparing the next generation, taking care of the wealth for them, helping them with investments, supporting all the needs that come with the multiple generations is where a lot of this comes out. Privacy, it's some families are not comfortable having a private banker or a multifamily office that knows as much about them as they would if they're outsourcing those services. They're much more comfortable having a small group of people that work directly for them, that are day-to-day managing their privacy, protecting the family, overseeing their needs. And so that privacy concern, it's kind of a spectrum. I think every family with wealth definitely has a great degree of concern about privacy, but then some are going to be stronger than others on that. Legacy. So looking out 50 to 100 years, what's the legacy of this family, and how does this play out? Just if you think about a family with, let's say, $300 million, and they have 3 kids, but their plan is we're just going to split that money between those 3 kids and let each of them do their own thing. Is the family office going to make sense or not? It might still make sense, but as you start looking at the next generation, if they're splitting and they're going their own direction, that office may then get split and may So it makes more sense if you are, in fact, thinking about we've got assets in trust. We want to manage. We want to co-manage these assets. We want to take advantage of the larger minimums we can get. The things that impact having a larger wealth level. They want to take advantage of that. That legacy could make it more likely to have a family office versus we just want to split this at each generation and let them go their own direction. Control. If you've got staff, I want to control what they do. If we're buying a yacht, I want to go to my staff and tell them to drop everything and go research this for me and help me figure out where to register it and what to do with it and how we're going to pay for it, which entity it's going to come under and things like that. I can control that. If I've outsourced all of this, I have less control over the staff and how they spend their time, and it's a little harder sometimes to get them to drop what they're doing to go focus on your latest deal. Cost. All family offices are expensive. If you're forming one, it is expensive. It is, I won't say always, it's nearly always cheaper to have a multifamily office to use that than it is to use a single family office and have that control yourself. I remember some research a few years ago from the Family Office Exchange that had the average family office cost, I believe it was $2.1 million. It was over $2 million. And we're just talking about the staff and facilities and such, and not the investment costs. That's an average. But family offices are expensive. When the other factors on this list start to outweigh the cost, when you're more concerned about the next generations and the privacy and the control and the legacy and such than you are the cost, a family office starts making more sense. The last one on this list is usually the first one that somebody asks us about. The question comes in at, what level of wealth should I form a family office? And we've intentionally put this last because it's probably not the first question that should be coming out there. These other ones should be considered first. But what we can do is give a little bit of guidance. Under $100 million, we think it's typically too expensive to have a family office. There are exceptions. I know some families that have a family office under $100 million, and it makes perfect sense because of their complexity and the needs and what they're doing. But typically, under $100 million, it's too expensive. It doesn't make sense to have a single-family office. Now I'm going to go to the other side. Above $250 million, you can financially justify it. Other factors need to be weighed in, but you can come in and at $250 million plus, you can justify it. In that area in between the 100 to 250, we'll call that a gray area. That's one where you really need to weigh these factors and weigh the future growth, because of the assets. We've got families with $100 million that are saying we think this is going to double in the next 3 years because of the businesses we have. We're on a very steep growth trajectory. If that's the case, then it can make more sense. If you think, no, we've peaked, the assets are about where they're going to be, then maybe it doesn't make as much sense. It's just one of those things that you need to consider as you look at this. So I'm sorry that this was not a strict formula that we could just say A, B, C, and this is the answer. But I think that's realistic. So having gone through that, Belinda, if you would help us through, if somebody decides they want a family office, they need to do this, what's the process that they want to go through?
Sure. This is a place where we spend a lot of time working with families to think about that setup and the structure and the design of the office. And, we can't really overemphasize the need for diligent planning on the front end of the process. As I mentioned earlier, when we talked about how long it can take to set up a family office, we do sometimes see families that move very quickly to getting a staff in place and getting up and running. And unfortunately, sometimes a year or 18 months later, what they find is that they have something that doesn't do exactly what they wanted it to do or needed it to do. It might be too expensive. It might be a little too rigid, or it might just be a little bit ineffective. And so they end up having to adjust and amend and make changes. So really understanding at the front end of the process, putting this in the perspective of what's the family's legacy when they close their eyes and think about what 100 years looks like from now. What is it that they really want to achieve, they really value, and they really hold sacrosanct? Getting that vision right on the front end of the process makes everything, all other parts of the process, a lot more efficient and a lot smoother. From a modeling perspective, Charlie, as you mentioned earlier, there are many options from a legal structure. It can be an LLC, it can be a corporate structure, it can be a private trust company, it can be embedded in the operating company. There are tax considerations and structural considerations around all of those that, oftentimes we work with families to help model through. This is also where the time needs to be taken to really think about the services that the office is going to provide and the purpose and the goals aligned to the family office and to the family, and lastly, to do some financial modeling. So understanding, is this a break-even endeavor? Is this an opportunity for profit for the family? Is the cost of the office going to be supported by all family members or a single generation? Lots of alternatives that can be looked at from the standpoint of how the setup is going to work. We then think about design for governance, for funding, for services, operations and technology, staffing, budgeting, and reporting, and the development of process flows, controls, understanding what should be done in-house, what could potentially be outsourced to a vendor. We really emphasize with families and see great importance in having very defined policies and procedures and communication protocols, not just with the family, but with any non-family office staff as well. Things like written job descriptions and performance reviews for the employees in the office. And then really the last phase is implementing. Getting everything in line and launching the office and putting that design into practice. On the next slide, we've actually shown a visual design of a family office structure, looking at main categories, 7 main categories that we would generally think about, from operations and technology to compliance to investments, enterprise and succession. You'll see legacy again at the base of the house, and we think about it really as legacy is the future, but it's also the foundation. It is the element that we want to build upon in order to make sure that the right structure and implementation is in place around the design of the family office and the delivery of services to family members.
Great.
Charlie, I have a few relevant questions to the last couple of slides that I think would be worth throwing in at this point, if it's okay with you.
Yeah.
One was, when you were talking about investment, $100 million, the question was, $100 million of what? When you're thinking about worth here, is it revenue, total assets? Does it matter how much cash the investments are spinning off?
Wow, that's a question I usually turn around and ask when somebody asks me the asset question. I was like, we counting the value of the family business? Because that's where the complexity becomes more important than the actual dollars. So usually when somebody's asking me the question, they're talking about investable assets. Now, if that's a $50 million property that they have, building that is out there, what's the real needs? What's the complexity? Things like that. Again, this is the question that you've asked is that exactly why the other factors become more important than just the pure wealth of the family.
Okay. And then there's two related questions, actually three, but a lot of them relate to cost structures. So let me start with one, which is, can you elaborate on the different cost structures of family offices? For example, how much does it cost to run a family office in a multi-family office, a single-family office, a private trust company? Is there a common pricing structure that family businesses should expect?
It's very, very. Belinda, you have a thought on that?
It's very different. I mean, I think the easiest pricing structure often to understand is a multifamily office pricing structure. So most multifamily offices are going to charge one of two ways. They're going to charge a basis point fee based on assets under advisement, which is not necessarily assets that they're managing, but the wealth that they are overseeing on behalf of the family. And that can range anywhere from typically 10 to 20 or 25 basis points. You'll also see a lot of multifamily offices that will charge an annual retainer, which is based on the scope of services that they're providing for the family. So it's not generally a la carte pricing, but there's an underlying component to it that assigns or ascribes a level of fee to a particular service and then bundles it together to present it as a total fee to the client. From a single-family office perspective, as Charlie said, the numbers can vary fairly dramatically depending upon the services that the office is providing for the family, the type of staff that is in the office, and whether there's an opportunity to leverage capabilities or infrastructure from a related family operating company. And then as it relates to private trust companies, those structures are most often used where there is significant complexity in the asset structures and in the family ownership, and in situations where the family wants to retain control around fiduciary decisions. So they want the continuity of fiduciary decisions to continue in a family-controlled structure. It is not an inexpensive structure to have and to oversee, but again, very specific to the complexity of the wealth and the types of holdings, it can be a very effective solution for particular families.
And just a couple of the other factors. I mean, so if you've got a very investment-oriented, so you're planning to do the investment management within the family office, so you're hiring experienced, top-notch investment people, it's going to be a lot more expensive, your cost there, than if you are outsourcing that to other providers. And even then, within the investment side here, if you're investing in marketable, or a couple of the families we work with are very passive investments. They're doing ETF investments versus others who are out there looking for the next venture capital deal, and they're doing direct venture capital investments, and they're looking at people who can analyze and do all the steps along. In fact, in some cases, they're the general partner on real estate deals. So they're out there looking for, buying, and doing those real estate deals. Your expenses are going to be higher because of the staff and other needs that you have in managing those deals. So it's really hard to generalize what the costs are and ought to be. I agree with Belinda, though, that the simplest of them is if it's an MFO. That's where it's easier to quantify the cost.
Terrific. There is another one that maybe, Allison, you've had some experience with this, but this is for everyone. How do you deal with the inequities of different services? For example, time, cost, level of service among shareholders in a family office. If some shareholders have more complex taxes than others or more complex needs, how do you deal with that?
Well, from Biltmore's perspective, I don't think that has been much of an issue because the family is still relatively small. So again, we just stress the communications and the education, and we are so fortunate to draw on our professional advisors and our internal expertise as well from the operating company. So maybe Charlie or Belinda could speak more to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple of different ways that I've seen families address it, and I think it does go back fundamentally to the view of the role of the office and the perceived value of the office by family members and by generations. There are situations where, particularly early on in the evolution of a family office, a particular generation or a group of family members is bearing the cost of the family office. I think we've seen lots of situations where over time the cost allocation model of the office does change depending upon who's using particular services, whether family members are asking for other services that not everybody wants. So there's a number of sort of pricing structures and models out there, some where there are situations I know where office staff are actually allocating specific time to a particular family client or group of family clients, and then at the end of the year, the costs are allocated out based on sort of a time and materials basis. Other situations where they're borne equally by all family members or by all branches of the family. There's lots of different structures out there. I think the most important thing is to decide on what the right structure is, make sure that everyone is aware of that structure and that there's buy-in to it so that expectations are set and managed over time.
Excellent. Thank you. I still have a few additional questions, but Charlie, if you'd like to do some key takeaways, and then we can address the final questions after that.
Great. Okay, so we just have a few key takeaways here. And first is that it's, and I'm sorry to say this, it's not an easy formula. There's not a clear-cut, quantitative formula to say when a family office is right. It is a qualitative. It's a very personal evaluation for that family as to whether it's the right answer or not. Every family office is unique. It really is a true statement. There's no simple right answer of which structure I should be in, what type of office to form. I mean, even now there's been a lot of discussion with tax reform as to, well, corporations are now more beneficial than LLCs, and we've done some modeling, and in many cases they are, but there's also still a lot of cases where an LLC is still a more beneficial format. So, it's something that has to get evaluated for every single family as they look at this. The third one here is commit the time up front to decide what the legacy is of the family, what your desired legacy is, what your long-term goals are, what you want this family office to do, and not just jump right into saying, we know this person and we're just going to hire them and go ahead and form the family office. We've had several situations, in fact, in the last year we've gotten involved in that they'd formed a family office and had to backtrack, eliminate the staff, start all over again. And as we tell them, create a business plan. You wouldn't start a business without a business plan. Create a business plan. Let's go in there and figure out what the business family office is going to do, how it's going to work, cost, everything like that. And then last, I guess that is the last one there. So if you're going to do this, start with that business plan. That's the most important. So with that, thank you all for being on here. And any questions you have for any of us, any of the three of us, we're happy to answer those.
Okay, we're still open for questions. I have one that's very specific and would be an interesting recommendation. What kind of specific software solutions or platforms have you seen family offices use for accounting, tracking, reporting, or that includes all of those functions? Is there a family office specific software out there that you're aware of?
Oh, that's one of the most common questions we get. I have a list in front of me. I'd have to go through and count them of something like 30 or so general ledger systems and maybe another 25 or so data aggregation reporting systems. And those are the two that we're most commonly being asked about. And there's not a single right answer. There's only a couple that do that combine investment reporting and your accounting services. There's only a couple of those that give you all of that in one platform. For the most part, what you're seeing is a lot of families that have taken a general ledger, they've customized it to them, they're taking an investment reporting system and customized it to them, and they're using those two in partnership. But as to which one is right for a family, it's going to depend on if they're trading in-house, what type of assets they're holding, are they doing partnership accounting, do they have a need for that? So when we talk about that, that's where this trust owns 30% of that portfolio, which is also owned by 4 other trusts, and we're trying to keep track of the income into that portfolio as to which trust or which entity it gets attributed to. And so you're needing to do that complex accounting system to try to figure that out. There's a lot of, and even within a family, if it's a family that's doing a lot of real estate investments or oil and gas investments, the general ledger that they need is probably different than one who is doing more marketable investments. So it really, depending on what the investments are, how complex the family is, what their needs really are, is going to drive which of these systems makes the most sense for them.
Excellent. Thank you. Here's another question from the audience. How generally are family offices funded? Is it through the operating business or by the shareholders and family members themselves?
Initially, if they're embedded in the business, you're seeing that coming out of the operating company initially. What you see over time is that they shift to where they're charging the different trusts. Well, actually, let me even back up in there. What you're also seeing is initially funded by the oldest generation. They can look at it as an estate planning technique, their wealth transfer technique, or they want the younger generations to use the family office. They want them to take advantage of the risk management, of the education, the budgeting, the tools that the family office has. They want them to use it. So the older generations decide it's better off for them to go ahead and just pay for that. So you'll see that a lot. Then the next step that you'll see is the family office will allocate their costs to the various trusts based on either usage of the family office or based on an AUM model. What we always encourage, because we do get a lot of questions about cost allocation, and we've had a couple here today, we get a lot of questions about that. As simple as you can make it, do that. There are a few families that have really proposed, and I guess there's a couple that are doing some really complex cost allocation models. And for your staff of the family office, a lot of them came from the accounting firms, and part of the benefits, part of the draw to going to a family office was to not have to do a timesheet all the time. And so if you make it too complex, now all of a sudden your family office staff are having to do a timesheet to figure out who they were working for and which trust and which person and then allocate that time. You make that really complex. And again, you can discourage the younger family members from using the family office, and they're the ones who you probably most want to use it from a risk management viewpoint.
Charlie, the only that's a great point. The only other model that I would mention that we see sometimes, particularly with an investment-focused office, is where the office is funded using a portion of the returns off of the investments that they are driving or managing on behalf of the family.
Actually, that's a great comment. You're right. I was negligent leaving that off.
And Allison, I'm wondering if you might take this one, but from your perspective, what are the practical reasons or advantages for establishing the family office as a separate entity and running a single family office?
Well, we have seen great benefit here. Like I said, this family is relatively smaller compared to others I have met, and the cohesiveness, the building of trust, the communication, the shared vision, the shared values, the shared learning and decision-making, those are critical. And I have seen that through my time here, just how important that is to the family and their family business and them working together. So family governance is a big part of what we do in family council meetings, and their involvement and their full commitment and participation to that. So that is a huge aspect of the importance of the family office.
Terrific. We have just a few minutes left. Barbara, do you have any final questions?
I sure do. Could you explain the difference between a multifamily office and a virtual family office, and which one is a better option in which case?
Multifamily office is a separate entity, a commercial entity that's handling multiple families, unrelated families. So, I've had some people refer to a single family, what I would call a single family office, as a multifamily office because it was, there were 5 branches of mom and dad started this family business. They had 5 kids, and they were talking about those 5 branches as separate families, and so they called it a multifamily office. Most of us would call that's still a single-family office. When we're talking about a multifamily office, it is, Bessemer Trust or GenSpring or U.S. Trust or one of the big banks that has gone out and formed an office that's handling multiple families, providing the services to them. So that's what a multifamily office is, unrelated families that they're providing that to. A virtual family office, as we see it in practicality, is usually a single-family office that is outsourcing most of their services to a variety. So it's not all going. So maybe this one family is out. If you're calling it, if they're using a multifamily office, I'll pick on Bessemer for a second. If they're outsourcing all of their services to Bessemer, they're using Bessemer as a multifamily office. However, when we think about it as a virtual family office, maybe they've outsourced their tax compliance to PwC. Maybe they've outsourced their bill pay to Bessemer. And maybe they've outsourced IT support to a local IT support firm. And you can kind of go through, I'm thinking about a wheel, the hub of a wheel with all the spokes coming out there. Each of the different services that they might need, they've outsourced to a variety of different providers. That would be the difference in my mind from a VFO versus an MFO. Is
there anything that families need to be particularly aware of if they're thinking of joining a multifamily office?
I think for any family, it's understanding the services that multifamily office offers, whether those services align appropriately with the needs of the family, and it's also getting an understanding of not by name who their other clients are for confidentiality reasons, but understanding the nature and the characteristics of the other families that they may work with and support, to make sure that, their situation is going to align appropriately with the not just the services of the multifamily office, but their skill set and experience in serving other families.
Okay, Barbara, I think we have maybe we should be wrapping up right now. I just wanted to note to everyone, if your question was not answered during this webcast, the questions will be provided to the presenters for individual follow-up. And thank you for the great questions. Barbara?
Well, I think we've learned that if you've seen one family office, you've seen one family office, as the saying goes. On behalf of Family Business Magazine, I'd like to thank Charlie, Belinda, and Allison for your insights into how the different types of family offices can benefit a family and for offering some points to consider before taking the plunge. As I mentioned earlier, the replay of the webinar will be available for all participants to listen to at your convenience, and the supporting materials will be sent to you so you can follow up. And now, on behalf of Family Business Magazine and our partner, PwC, I'd like to thank our listeners for joining our webinar. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.